I don't know if you noticed that the opening video and the first two songs kind of carried with it the theme of sounding the alarm, which is what we've been trying to do over the last several weeks, is sound the alarm about the things that are going on in this world around us. And we're going to be concluding our series, The Release of Satan, today. And remember, it's so important that we truly understand what we are facing in the world today as Christians. Because, as it's been said before, you've got to know your enemy if you're going to do battle against them. And that's what we're trying to do, is help just kind of take a look at what's going on so that we understand our enemy and what it is we're actually facing. And so it is vital we grasp how real this war is that we are in. And we've had three primary passages of Scriptures for this series that are directly connected. And the first, if you would, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. And as we noted, Jesus was talking about Satan repossessing the civilization, not just an individual, and that the result would be much worse than before. And then our other two primary passages we took from our end time study because they are directly connected. And the first, if you would, Revelation chapter 20, verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. And then on down a few verses later, if you would, now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. And we established during our end time study that the millennium must be symbolic and refer to this present age when we look at how everything truly fits together there. It is the time between Christ's first coming and his second coming on Judgment Day. The here and now, if you will. And the binding of Satan began at the cross with his defeat. And we saw that the binding of Satan didn't prevent evil from being in the world, but rather to prevent Satan from being able to deceive the nations by posing as a god through the demons. And then as the gospel spread, the demons, or false gods, were driven out of the public square. The deception was brought to an end, and Christ has been reigned through his church. Then we ask the question, what would Satan being released look like? And the answer was, we would begin to see the influence of these false gods or demons, primarily the three, Baal, Ashtoreth, and Molech, start to take over the public square as civilization would become repossessed. We also noted that we need to look at the demise of ancient Israel and Judah that was brought on by the worship of these three false demon gods and not the Roman Empire, to help us recognize and understand what possessing of a nation or a civilization would look like. We also saw that these three demon gods were known by different names in different cultures, but they are still the three demon gods. Baal, as we know him in the Bible, of the Canaanites and also Israel, was Zeus to the Greeks and was Jupiter to the Romans. Ashtoreth of the Scriptures, the Canaanite god, and later of Israel, was Ishtar to the Babylonians, Inanna to the Sumerians, Aphrodite to the Greeks, from where we get the word aphrodisiac, and Venus to the Romans. Molech of the Canaanites in Israel was Cronus to the Greeks and Saturn to the Romans. And we saw that Baal means Lord, owner, and master. Or in other words, the one who possesses. He was the ultimate god of fertility in that pantheon. And the Canaanites called him Lord of the Rain. And they would pray to him and offer sacrifices to him, hoping he would make the soil fertile and bring plenty of rain so that they would have abundant crops. And so once the Israelites began planting their crops, the temptation to worship Baal became more and more tempting, and he promised fertility and abundance in all areas of life. He was the head over all the gods, even to the point of being elevated above the true and living God by the Israelites. Baal became the other god to Israel. He was also a warrior god. He would lead the other gods into battle on behalf of the nations that worshipped him, but was always the master over the pantheon. We also noted that human sacrifices to Baal or Zeus were common, but were mainly adult sacrifices, and were also found among the Aztecs and the Incas in the Americas. And we looked at the evidence that he began to come out of the shadows when the throne of Satan, or the great altar of Zeus, went on display in Berlin's Pergamon Museum in 1930. And it was in that same year that the rally grounds for the Nazi Party was inaugurated in Nuremberg, and the design for the section of the rally grounds where Hitler would give his speeches was inspired by the great altar of Zeus. And while it is estimated that thousands were offered as sacrifice in the ancient world, millions died, or should we say sacrificed, during the Holocaust alone. Not to mention the millions killed in the USSR, China, and all across Asia. We noted that the Bull of Wall Street is actually also a symbol of Baal. We also noted that a massive recreation of the Arch of Triumph that led to the Temple of Baal was unveiled in Lower Manhattan on the grounds of City Hall. It was made of nearly 11 tons of Egyptian marble and rises nearly 20 feet from the ground. And it remained there for a week, and then it was moved to Dubai and then to other capital cities around the world, as Baal is no longer in the shadows, but is in the process of laying claim to and repossessing all that had been taken from him and more. And eventually it would make its way to be displayed also in Washington, D.C. New York City has functioned as a conduit for Baal's entrance into American civilization. Yes, as we look at the evidence that is there, Baal has returned. And if America, along with all of Western civilization, began turning away from God in the early 1960s, and Baal began coming out of the shadows, we would also expect Ashtoreth or Ishtar to be with him or follow close behind. Worshipping Baal and Ashtoreth together, as we saw, was common. We read in Judges 3, if you would, so the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. Asherahs being the plural for the many versions of Ashtoreth, just like there were many versions of Baal. And like we looked at, why were they worshipped simultaneously so often? Because Ashtoreth was considered Baal's wife or consort, depending on which version was being worshipped. And as a result, she was so important among the gods that she was called the Queen of Heaven. And by the time we get to the time of Jeremiah, the Israelites are also calling her by that name, if you would. The children gather wood, the fathers light the fire, and the women knead the dough and make the cakes to offer to the Queen of Heaven. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to arouse my anger. They worshipped her right alongside of Baal from the very beginning of their turning away. And we remembered Elijah and the people of Israel on Mount Carmel, and saw that what took place there included the prophets of Ashtoreth. And that when Baal, who was the chief demon god over the ancient pantheon, was defeated, so was Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth, or Aphrodite to the Greeks, was known for breaking the rules among the gods. She would threaten the gods if they didn't give her what she wanted. She stole the gods' sacred possessions. Her Greek name, Aphrodite, gives us an obvious clue to some of her characteristics. She was a seductress, the goddess of sexuality. In some ancient civilizations, she was connected to the sun and moon. The Romans associated her with the planet Venus, and we noted, that whole idea, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. She was the goddess of prostitution and was herself a prostitute. She was the wife of Baal, but never faithful to him. She's vindictive and given to rage. She would become vengeful and violent and would wreak havoc and destruction if she did not get what she wanted or was offended. And she was often portrayed also as the god of war with weapons and entering into combat. The association with the lion is probably because of this characteristic. She was fierce, impetuous, impulsive, hyper-emotional, demanding, tempestuous, extremely carnal, greedy, romantic, full of unbridled passion, insatiable sexual desire, and boundless pride. She was also the goddess of enchantments or magic spells. And love magic was her specialty. It was an enchantment that spawned uncontrollable desire or that altered one's affections and behavior. She possessed her worshipers and seized them. Her priestesses served as her vessels through whom she spoke and worked, and they also served as her sexual surrogates. Worship of Ashtoreth was filled with carnality and explicit sexuality. Her temples appeared to be nothing more than houses of prostitution, according to the description in ancient writings. And she ushered in the sexual revolution of the 1960s. This demon goddess' purpose is to cast her spell and lead a civilization that embraces Christian biblical morality to turn away from those values and embrace paganism, the worship of demons. She took sexual immorality and elevated it, being God. Ishtar's enchantments were and are intoxicating. She was and is the patron goddess of bars and taverns. She caused her followers to abandon reason and rationality, to do what they otherwise would never have considered doing otherwise. Her goal was to alter the conscious mind. American alcohol consumption suddenly began rising at the end of World War II and continued for 2 decades when the sexual revolution burst onto the scenes. And while alcohol consumption and alcoholism would continue to increase, a new escalation would begin in the 1960s under her influence, which has also continued to escalate until this very day. Drug abuse. The most popular of these new intoxicating substances were the psychedelic or mind-altering drugs that radically altered perception, thinking, and behavior. The altered consciousness is now glorified and desired. Sexuality, intoxicating substances, and music that excited the senses, all three were dominant in the temples of Ishtar and the worship of her. The music was of a type that resulted in the worshipers engaging in a type of dancing that reflected lewd movement and sensual gyrations. And that form of worship has entered into many churches today as they emphasize the expression of oneself in worship rather than denial of self. She has the ability to transform individuals, nations, and cultures and civilizations sexually. Combine that with her ability to alter the conscious mind, and what would you expect to see? She was known as the morning star, but also the evening star as the Roman goddess Venus, which reflected the duality of her nature. She has both a feminine nature and a masculine nature. This was the heart of what Ishtar in her various forms was all about. Masculine and feminine being one. Turning a man into a woman and a woman into a man. If she wanted to be a woman, she would be a woman. If she wanted to be a man, she would be a man. The ancient Sumerian hymn we looked at to her, a hymn to Inanna, or for Esme Dagon, says she has the power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, to change one into the other. When this demon began to move out of the shadows back in the public square in the 1960s, the definition of male and female began to be altered. And today we have the rise of the cancel culture. The lines between male and female are being blurred, and eventually the distinctions between the two will be nullified or canceled. The nature of man and woman is being transformed. All that is male is being feminized, and all that is female is being masculinized. Men are being turned into women, and women into men. It has become the primary weapon used to smash and cancel the biblical foundations of Western civilization. Ashtoreth, regardless of what name you call her, is the demon goddess of gross sexual deviation. And in order to perpetuate this change, she ushered in the feminist movement. The reality is, it is not a movement to assert feminism, as the name would imply, but rather it is a movement to defeminize women and to masculinize them. She is destroying the biblical male-female roles. She is separating woman from man and man from woman. It is a movement to transform women and change their identities, functioning in nature. And the battle cry of feminism is for a woman to become an independent woman, just as Ishtar was claimed to be. And so as the feminist movement has taken hold, and as the pressure for women to become financially successful and independent in the general workforce and break the glass ceiling has grown, an obstacle has gotten in the way of that success. And that obstacle threw open the door for the third demon god in the detestable trinity to also leap from the shadows and into the public square with a vengeance. It is actually not an obstacle, but the feminists see it as one. And what is that obstacle? If you would, children. Children are considered a hindrance to success. They get in the way and take up valuable time that could be invested in reaching the top. And the feminist answer to the obstacle is, if you would, abortion on demand. Get rid of whatever is in the way and make so you can have financial success, because whatever is in the way makes that success more difficult to attain. And declare the unborn non-human and completely disposable, even to the extent of calling the unborn a parasite to be done away with. And so, today, as we look, enter the third demon god of the detestable trinity, if you would, Molech. He is the abominable demon god. He is the one you might consider calling the destroyer, for he desires to destroy everything that he possibly can. In 1 Kings we read, if you would, then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. Both Chemosh and Molech are called an abomination, and are probably the same demon god, just from different cultures. And worship of these two gods, which are probably the same God, was so horrific that he earned the title of being an abomination. The Israelites were warned about him. If you would, and you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And so what we find happening is that Molech is on the scene. And the worship of Molech is so dark that the chief form of worship is that of the sacrifice of children. Even darker is the fact that the children are sacrificed by their own parents. The Bible describes it as a sign of a nation, of a civilization that has abandoned God. Even though Baal did receive child sacrifices also, Molech is considered the demon god of child sacrifice, and that the offerings brought to him were primarily children, and more specifically, if you would, infants. The ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus writes of the Carthaginians' worship of the Molech under his Greek name Cronus, if you would. There was in their city a bronze image of Cronus extending its hands, palms up and sloping toward the ground, so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. Imagine. The hands and arms of this bronze image are glowing red hot at the fingertips and almost white hot next to the torso where the fire pit is located. The naked infant is placed on the glowing red palms and immediately begins screaming in pain as it slowly rolls down into the flames and is burnt alive as an offering to Molech in ancient Israel and to Cronus in Greece. The ancient historian Plutarch writes, if you would, and the whole area before the statue was filled with a loud noise of flutes and drums, so that the cries of wailing should not reach the ears of the people. Today, They are sacrificed in the womb where the screams are silenced and the writhing and excruciating pain is unseen. God, speaking through Jeremiah, says, if you would, and they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I did not command them, nor did it come into my mind that they should do this abomination, to cause Judah to sin. Infants and young children were considered disposable to the ancient pagan world. Even the healthy could be disposed of if they were unwanted. It was common for unwanted children to be murdered in their mother's wombs even then. It is a common element when God is forsaken and the pagan is embraced. The more pagan a civilization becomes, the less human life is valued, and the more barbaric that civilization becomes. And what could cause a mother of ancient times to lift her infant child to the arms of Molech? Jonathan Kahn writes, if you would, she believed that by doing so she would obtain the God's favor. Her fields would be fruitful. She would be given prosperity. Her prayers would be given answers, and her life would be blessed. And he goes on to say, if you would, in the modern replaying, what could lead a mother to kill the son or daughter of her womb? The most frequently given answer is that if the child lived, it would hamper the mother's life, her time, her energy, her educational or career prospects, her future earning capabilities. The child would be a burden to her aspirations. Thus, by killing the child, the hindrance and burden would be removed, and she would be in a better position to achieve her goals and attain success and prosperity. The same reward that was offered to the ancients is offered today. In the time of Plutarch, the rich were buying children from the poverty-stricken and would sacrifice them in place of their own. And it was the poverty-stricken mothers who would offer up their children more often than any others. Molech was and is a racist demon god. Abortion today impacts the poor and minorities more than any other social group. The child of a poor family, and particularly of a black family, is far more likely to be killed by abortion than the child who is not black or poor. Molech detests the poor and downcast, and anyone who is not of the same race as his worshipers. Hence, then, the impact he had on the Nazis as well, and their belief that they were superior to all other races. And hence Margaret Sanger's desire for abortion on demand to reduce the minority population, especially among the blacks. The detestable trinity have returned, and America and all of civilization is systematically being led to forget about the true and living God and turn to false gods as this world we live in is becoming more and more pagan. Tens of thousands were sacrificed on the altars of Molech during the approximate 1,500 years from the time of the flood of Noah's day until the proclamation of the gospel. But, if you would, over 60 million unborn children have been sacrificed in the womb in the last 50 years since the initial Roe versus Wade ruling in 1973. Think about that. Tens of thousands over 1,500 years for the ancients. But for us, within only 50 years, over 60 million. And what are we doing? Remember what we talked about last week? God made us male and female because He wanted godly offspring. He wanted children. And we're denying that function, that purpose for our being. This state of civilization truly is devastatingly worse than it was before Satan had been driven out, just as Jesus predicted. He has returned with a vengeance through the working of these three demon gods who have come out of the shadows on the fringes of society and have leaped onto the public square. We need to understand that the things we are looking at are the escalation of this battle of Armageddon that we are in as we move closer to the final day when Christ returns and puts an end to the war once and for all. And we need to realize that it is going to get worse, and at some point Christians will begin to be offered on the altars of the pagan world as Satan tries to completely wipe out the church. But Jesus made two promises. The first in Matthew 16, if you would, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Yes, the church may be driven underground again. The church may be driven into the shadows again. But Satan will not prevail against it. The church will continue to exist until Christ returns. And then in John 16, he tells us, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." And in Christ Jesus, we are promised to have the victory and to be able to overcome through Him. We need to understand this is a real war we are facing, and we must understand that we cannot be complacent. That we must be spreading the gospel and winning as many as we can to Christ. That is what we are called to do. That is part of being a faithful servant. And Christ told us as we were looking at the letters in Revelation that those who remain faithful in all things are the ones who will receive the reward, the crown, the life. And remember, no matter how bad it may get, if you read the end of the book, if you would, Christ and His faithful servants will be victorious. Yes, it's probably going to seem bleak at times. It's going to seem like we're losing. And yeah, like I said, the church, Scriptures tell us the church is going to be driven into the shadows, driven underground. But it is going to continue to exist. And those who remain faithful will be victorious with Christ. And those who do not remain faithful will be sent to eternal destruction with the devil and his angels. This is a real war. As we looked at the very beginning, these demon gods, they're real. They're not mythological. As we looked at in Exodus, that those ancient gods had power, and that power was displayed through their priests. But one of the wonderful things we saw in Exodus was that they were only given 3 opportunities then to display their power, and then God said, "That's done. Now I'm going to show you who's really in charge." And as we see things taking place in the world around us, as we see these demon gods coming back into the world, and as we see these things happening, there's going to come a day when Christ is going to say, "Okay, now we're done. Now I'm going to show you who's really in charge once and for all. And we're going to put an end to this once and for all." And the faithful will stand with Him and be victorious. But until then, we are called to be spreading the gospel. We are called to be bringing as many to Christ as we possibly can. And yeah, it's going to be difficult because we are in a world that is abandoning God and chasing after paganism. Because like we've talked about, there is no such thing as a secular world. It's either pagan or it's Christian, one of the two. There is no secular world. Secularism is just a form of paganism. But until Christ returns, we are to be proclaiming the gospel and serving Him faithfully in every possible way that we can. And so as we prepare to close today, I want to encourage you. Do everything you can to spread the gospel. First thing when you get up in the morning, ask yourself, go to the Lord, what can I do to spread the gospel today? What can I do that you can work through me, Lord, to see that the gospel is spread to someone? You may not see the results. You may not reap a harvest. But you're planting the seed. It's just like with our gardens. We put the seed out there, it doesn't immediately come up. Some of that seed comes up fairly quickly. Some of that seed, it takes a while. Spreading the gospel and planting the seed and remaining faithful in all things, even unto death. How can you serve him better? How can we all serve him better? Become more effective at planting the seed and trusting God for the harvest.